The morning started like any other Tuesday in London's upscale Belgravia district. Tom Parker Bowles had just finished his morning coffee when he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots on the marble steps outside his elegant Georgian flat. As Queen Camilla's eldest son, he was no stranger to security protocols, but something about the rhythmic pounding made his stomach turn. Through the tall windows overlooking the tree-lined street, Tom watched as black vehicles with tinted windows pulled up one after another. Men in dark suits emerged, their movements precise and coordinated. These weren't ordinary police officers or even regular security personnel. The distinctive red plumes on their ceremonial helmets and the gold braiding on their uniforms marked them unmistakably as members of the Royal Guard. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup. In his 48 years of life, he had never seen the Royal Guard deployed for anything other than ceremonial duties or the most serious matters of state security. The sight of them approaching his private residence sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the October morning air. The lead officer, a stern-faced man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, approached the front door with measured steps. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. Behind him, 6 other guards formed a precise formation, their faces expressionless masks of professional duty. Tom's mind raced through recent events, trying to understand what could have prompted such an unprecedented response. He had lived quietly since his mother became queen consort, carefully avoiding any behavior that might embarrass the royal family. His food-writing career had flourished, his restaurant reviews were well respected, and he had stayed out of the tabloid headlines for months. The knock on the door came exactly 3 times, firm but not aggressive. Tom smoothed his shirt and walked slowly toward the entrance, each step echoing in the suddenly too quiet flat. The Persian rugs that usually muffled his footsteps seemed to have lost their power to absorb sound. "Mr. Parker Bowles," the lead officer announced when Tom opened the door. His voice carried the authority of centuries of royal tradition. "I am Colonel Morrison of Her Majesty's Royal Guard. We have been authorized to conduct a search of these premises under the Royal Prerogative Powers Act." Tom felt the blood drain from his face. The Royal Prerogative Powers Act was rarely invoked, reserved for matters that threatened the very foundation of the monarchy. He had only heard of it being used twice in recent history, both times involving potential treason charges that had made international headlines. "I don't understand," Tom managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "What could you possibly be looking for here? I'm a food critic, not a political activist." Colonel Morrison's expression remained unchanged, but Tom caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it sympathy, regret? The officer reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded document bearing the royal seal. "We have reason to believe that items of significant historical importance to the crown may be located within these premises," Morrison explained, his tone carefully neutral. "Items that were reported missing from the royal collection some months ago." Tom's confusion deepened. Missing royal artifacts? The idea was absurd. He had never shown any interest in collecting royal memorabilia, and his flat, while comfortable, was filled with modern furniture and contemporary art. The most valuable thing he owned was probably his collection of first-edition cookbooks. As the guards filed past him into his home, Tom noticed neighbors beginning to emerge from their own flats, drawn by the unusual commotion. Mrs. Henderson from across the hall peered out nervously, her morning newspaper forgotten in her hand. The young couple from the top floor stood at their window, mobile phones already out and recording. Within minutes, Tom realized, this would be all over social media. The son of the Queen Consort being raided by the Royal Guard would be front-page news around the world within hours. His carefully maintained private life was about to become very public indeed. Colonel Morrison gestured for Tom to sit in his own living room while the search commenced. The guards moved through the flat with military precision, their gloved hands carefully examining every surface, every drawer, every hiding place that Tom didn't even know existed in his own home. "Colonel," Tom ventured after several minutes of tense silence, "surely you can tell me what specifically you're looking for. If there's been some mistake, some misunderstanding, perhaps we can clear this up quickly." Morrison studied Tom's face carefully, as if trying to read the truth written there. "Mr. Parker Bowles, are you familiar with the coronation necklace of Queen Adelaide?" Tom shook his head slowly. The name meant nothing to him, though it sounded like something that belonged in a museum rather than his modest flat. "I've never heard of it, Colonel. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about royal jewelry. It's a diamond and sapphire necklace commissioned for Queen Adelaide's coronation in 1831, Morrison explained, his eyes never leaving Tom's face. It contains the famous Blue Moon sapphire, one of the rarest gems in the royal collection. The necklace went missing from the Tower of London's jewelry vault 6 weeks ago. The weight of the accusation hit Tom like a physical blow. They suspected him of stealing priceless royal jewels. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if not for the very real presence of the royal guard systematically searching his home. From the kitchen came the sound of drawers being opened and closed. In his bedroom, he could hear guards carefully moving furniture, their boots creating a steady rhythm on the hardwood floors. Every few minutes, one of them would call out "clear," in a voice that carried the practiced efficiency of military training. Tom closed his eyes and tried to process what was happening. Somewhere in the vast machinery of royal security and protocol, a decision had been made that he, Tom Parker Bowles, food critic and son of the Queen Consort, was a suspect in the theft of one of the Crown's most precious artifacts. As the search continued around him, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much larger and more complicated than a simple case of missing jewelry. The search had been underway for nearly 2 hours when Sergeant Williams emerged from Tom's study, carrying a small wooden box. The officer's face was grave as he approached Colonel Morrison, the box held carefully in his gloved hands like it contained something dangerous. "Sir," Williams said quietly, though Tom could hear every word in the sudden silence that had fallen over the flat. "We found this hidden behind the false back of the desk drawer. It appears to be deliberately concealed." Tom felt his heart skip a beat. He had owned that antique desk for 5 years, purchased from a reputable dealer in Portobello Road. He had never known about any false back, never had reason to explore its hidden compartments. The very existence of such a thing in his own furniture came as a complete shock. Colonel Morrison took the box and examined it carefully. It was made of dark mahogany, about the size of a jewelry box with intricate brass hinges and a small brass nameplate that had been polished to a bright shine. Tom squinted to read the engraving from where he sat, but the colonel's hands obscured most of the writing. "Mr. Parker Bowles," Morrison said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "Can you explain how this came to be in your possession?" Tom shook his head emphatically. "I've never seen that box before in my life, Colonel. I swear to you I had no idea there was any hidden compartment in that desk. I bought it from an antique dealer 5 years ago for my home office." Morrison's fingers worked at the small brass clasp that held the box closed. Tom found himself holding his breath, dreading what might be revealed inside. The clicking of the mechanism seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room, each sound echoing off the walls like a countdown to disaster. When the lid finally opened, Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, the first change in his controlled expression since he had arrived. He angled the box so that Tom could see its contents, and what Tom saw made his stomach drop to his feet. Nestled in purple velvet padding lay what appeared to be a collection of loose diamonds and sapphires, each stone catching the morning light and throwing sparkles across the box's interior. Even to Tom's untrained eye, the gems looked extraordinarily valuable, the kind of precious stones that belonged in royal vaults rather than hidden compartments in food critics' desks. "These appear to match the description of stones from the missing coronation necklace," Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral. "Each gem in Queen Adelaide's necklace was catalogued and photographed for insurance purposes. We'll need to have these examined by our experts, but the preliminary appearance is quite concerning." Tom felt the world spinning around him. This couldn't be happening. He was innocent of any wrongdoing, yet here were what appeared to be stolen royal jewels hidden in his own furniture. The implications were staggering, not just for him personally, but for his mother and the entire royal family. "Colonel, please, you have to believe me," Tom said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm not a thief. I've never stolen anything in my life, certainly not from the royal collection. Someone else must have put those stones there. This has to be some kind of setup." Morrison studied Tom's face intently, his trained eyes looking for any sign of deception. After a long moment, he seemed to reach some kind of decision. "Mr. Parker Bowles, I've been in this business for 27 years, Morrison said quietly. "I've seen every kind of criminal and every kind of lie. Your reaction appears genuine, but the evidence is quite damning. I'm afraid I have no choice but to place you under arrest pending further investigation. The words hit Tom like a physical blow. Arrested. The son of the Queen consort. Arrested for stealing crown jewels. The scandal would be enormous, the embarrassment to his mother and King Charles unthinkable. His mind immediately went to his children, to his ex-wife, to everyone who would be dragged into this nightmare through their association with him. Wait, Tom said suddenly, a thought occurring to him. The antique dealer. The man I bought the desk from. He might know something about these hidden compartments. If someone was using my furniture to hide stolen goods, maybe he was involved. Or maybe he can tell us who owned the desk before me. Morrison nodded slightly. We'll certainly be investigating the provenance of the furniture, Mr. Parker Bowles. What was the name of the dealer? Tom closed his eyes, trying to remember details from 5 years earlier. Jameson. Marcus Jameson. He had a small shop called Heritage Antiques on Portobello Road. He specialized in Georgian and Victorian pieces. He seemed very knowledgeable, very reputable. Sergeant Williams was already pulling out a notepad, scribbling down the information. Morrison gestured to 2 of his officers who immediately understood the silent command and headed toward the door to begin tracking down the antique dealer. Mr. Parker Bowles, Morrison continued, I'm going to ask you to accompany us to Scotland Yard for formal questioning. Given your family connections, this matter will need to be handled with the utmost discretion and thoroughness. Tom nodded numbly. He understood the delicate position everyone was in. This wasn't just a criminal investigation anymore. It was a potential constitutional crisis. The Queen consort's son accused of stealing crown jewels would send shockwaves through the monarchy and the government alike. As Tom gathered his coat and wallet, his phone began ringing insistently. The caller ID showed his mother's private number. Tom stared at the device, paralyzed by the thought of having to explain this situation to Queen Camilla. How do you tell your mother that you've been arrested for stealing from the crown she now wears? Colonel Morrison gently took the phone from Tom's hand. Perhaps it would be best to speak with Her Majesty after we've had a chance to conduct our initial interviews, he suggested diplomatically. We may have more clarity about the situation by then. Tom could only nod in agreement. The idea of facing his mother while handcuffed and under suspicion was unbearable. At least if they could solve this mystery quickly. Perhaps he could explain everything with the truth rather than having to proclaim his innocence, while the evidence seemed to point so clearly toward his guilt. As they prepared to leave the flat, Tom took one last look around his home. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, yet everything had changed completely. His safe, private world had been turned upside down by the contents of a wooden box he never knew existed. Scotland Yard's interview rooms were nothing like the ones Tom had seen in television shows. The small windowless space was painted in institutional beige, furnished only with a metal table and 3 uncomfortable chairs. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look tired and suspicious. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen sat across from Tom, her dark eyes alert and professional. She had been called in specifically for this case, due to her expertise in high-value theft investigations and her reputation for discretion in sensitive matters. Beside her sat Colonel Morrison, who had insisted on being present for all interviews related to the royal investigation. Mr. Parker Bowles, Detective Chen began, her voice calm and measured. I want you to understand that we're treating this as a very serious matter, but we're also committed to finding the truth, whatever that may be. Can you walk me through your movements over the past 2 months? Tom rubbed his temples, trying to focus despite the surreal nature of his situation. I've been working mostly from home, writing restaurant reviews and working on a new cookbook. I travel to restaurants around London maybe 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes with my photographer, sometimes alone. Detective Chen made notes in her file. Have you noticed anything unusual about your flat recently? Any signs that someone might have been inside when you weren't there? Tom thought carefully. Had there been anything? Small things that he might have dismissed as his own forgetfulness? Actually, he said slowly. About 3 weeks ago, I thought I remembered leaving my study door closed, but when I came home from dinner, it was open. I assumed I had forgotten, but now that you mention it, what else? Chen prompted. There was one morning when my desk drawers seemed to be in slightly different positions than I remembered leaving them, but I thought maybe the cleaning lady had been dusting and hadn't put everything back exactly right. Colonel Morrison leaned forward. When was this? About 6 weeks ago, Tom replied. Right around the time you said the necklace went missing. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Detective Chen exchanged a meaningful glance with Morrison before continuing her questions. Tell me about your daily routine.
Who has access to your flat?
Who knows your schedule well enough to predict when you'll be away? Tom considered this carefully. My cleaning lady, Mrs. Rodriguez, comes twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. She's been working for me for 3 years, very trustworthy. My assistant, Jenny, has a spare key for emergencies. My ex-wife used to have one, but I changed the locks after our divorce 2 years ago. What about your mother's security detail? Morrison asked. Any of them familiar with your routines? This was a sensitive question. Tom knew that his mother's protection officers occasionally conducted security sweeps of family members' residences, though it wasn't something they discussed openly. I assume they might check on me from time to time, he admitted, but I've never been aware of their presence. Detective Chen pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It showed a man in his 60s with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, wearing an expensive-looking suit. Do you recognize this person? Tom studied the image carefully. The face looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. I think I might have seen him before, but I can't remember where. He looks like someone I might have met at a literary event or restaurant opening, but I can't be sure. His name is Dr. Edmund Hartwell, Chen explained. He's an expert in royal artifacts and gemstones. He was consultant to several auction houses and has written extensively about the crown jewels. More importantly, he was one of only 6 people who had access to the Tower of London vault where Queen Adelaide's necklace was stored. The implications of this information hit Tom immediately. You think he might be involved in the theft? Dr. Hartwell disappeared 4 days ago, Morrison said grimly. His housekeeper found his home in Kensington ransacked, but there were no signs of forced entry. We believe he may have been working with accomplices. Tom felt a flicker of hope for the first time since the morning's raid. So you think someone else stole the necklace and somehow used my flat to hide the evidence? Detective Chen held up a cautioning hand. We're exploring all possibilities, Mr. Parker Bowles. The fact remains that stolen crown jewels were found hidden in your furniture. We need to understand how they got there and who had the opportunity to place them. A knock on the interview room door interrupted the conversation. A young constable entered and whispered something urgently in Detective Chen's ear. Her expression grew more serious as she listened. Mr. Parker Bowles, she said after the constable left, we've just received some interesting information about the antique dealer you mentioned. Marcus Jameson's shop closed permanently 18 months ago. According to his former landlord, Jameson left suddenly without forwarding address, owing several months' rent. Tom's heart sank. Another dead end? Another piece of evidence that seemed to point toward his involvement rather than his innocence. But he seemed so legitimate when I bought the desk, Tom protested. He had all the proper documentation, authentication papers for the piece. We're working on tracking down Jameson's whereabouts, Chen assured him. But this development does complicate things. It suggests a level of planning and coordination that we hadn't previously considered. Colonel Morrison's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He read it quickly, his expression becoming even more grave. Detective Chen, I'm afraid we have another development. The gemology experts at the tower have completed their preliminary analysis of the stones found in Mr. Parker Bowles' flat. Tom held his breath, hoping against hope that the gems would prove to be fakes or replicas. The stones are authentic, Morrison continued. They match the exact specifications and identifying characteristics of the gems from Queen Adelaide's coronation necklace. We're dealing with the real thing. The weight of this confirmation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Tom was no longer dealing with a case of mistaken identity or a simple misunderstanding. Genuine crown jewels, worth millions of pounds and irreplaceable in their historical significance, had been found hidden in his home. However, Morrison added, studying his phone more carefully, there's something else. The experts noticed something unusual about how the stones were removed from their settings. The work was done by someone with advanced knowledge of jewelry construction, using tools and techniques that suggest professional training. Detective Chen leaned forward with interest. What kind of professional training? The kind that Dr. Edmund Hartwell would have had access to through his work with auction houses and private collectors, Morrison replied. The removal was surgical, precise, designed to preserve both the stones and the original settings for possible reassembly. Tom felt another small spark of hope. So you think Dr. Hartwell might have been the one who actually stole the necklace? It's a strong possibility, Chen admitted. The question remains, how did the stones end up in your flat and why? If Hartwell was working alone, why would he risk hiding evidence in the home of someone so closely connected to the royal family? And if he was working with accomplices, who were they? And what was their ultimate plan? The breakthrough came at 3:47 in the afternoon, when Detective Chen's phone rang with urgent news from the forensics team. Tom watched her face carefully as she listened, trying to read any sign of hope in her expression. After several tense minutes, she hung up and turned to face him with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Mr. Parker Bowles, we've just received some very interesting information from the fingerprint analysis of that wooden box, she announced. Your fingerprints are nowhere to be found on it. Not on the exterior, not on the interior, not on any of the gems inside. Tom felt a rush of relief so powerful it made him dizzy. That proves I never handled it, right? That I didn't know it was there? It's certainly consistent with your story, Chen agreed. But more importantly, we did find several clear fingerprints that don't belong to you. We're running them through the database now, and we should have results within the hour. Colonel Morrison was already on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone at the Tower of London. Tom caught fragments of the conversation, words like security, review, and internal investigation that suggested the scope of this case was expanding rapidly. Beyond his personal situation, there's something else. Detective Chen continued. Our team examining your desk found traces of fresh sawdust in the hidden compartment. The wood shavings are consistent with recent modification to the furniture, probably within the last 6 to 8 weeks. Tom leaned forward eagerly. So someone deliberately created that hiding place recently? It wasn't an original feature of the desk? That appears to be the case. Someone with woodworking skills accessed your flat, modified your furniture to create a concealment space, and used it to hide stolen crown jewels. The question is whether they intended for the gems to be found there, or whether they were planning to retrieve them later. The implications were staggering. Someone had been planning this for weeks, carefully orchestrating a scheme that involved not just stealing priceless artifacts, but framing the Queen Consort's son in the process. The level of audacity required was breathtaking. Colonel Morrison finished his phone call and rejoined the conversation. I've just spoken with the head of Royal Security. They're conducting a complete review of everyone who had access to information about the crown jewels storage and handling procedures. They're also investigating anyone who might have had detailed knowledge of your personal routines and security arrangements. You think this was planned specifically to implicate me? Tom asked. It's beginning to look that way, Morrison admitted. The choice of hiding place was particularly clever. Your flat is close enough to the Tower of London to be a logical temporary storage location. But your family connections would make you an obvious suspect if the gems were discovered. It would have created maximum scandal and embarrassment for the royal family. Detective Chen's phone rang again, and she answered it immediately. Tom watched her face transform as she listened to the caller, her professional composure giving way to obvious excitement. We have a match on the fingerprints, she announced after hanging up. Dr. Edmund Hartwell's prints are all over that box, and we've also identified prints belonging to someone named Victoria Ashworth. Morrison's reaction was immediate and intense. Victoria Ashworth? Are you certain? You know her? Chen asked. Morrison's face had gone pale. Victoria Ashworth is a former conservator who worked at the British Museum for 12 years. She was dismissed 18 months ago following allegations of improper handling of artifacts. More importantly, she was briefly employed as a consultant by the Royal Collection Trust last year. The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fit together. Tom felt a growing sense of vindication mixed with amazement at the complexity of the scheme that had nearly destroyed his life. So Dr. Hartwell and Victoria Ashworth were working together, Tom said. But why frame me specifically? What did they gain by making me look guilty? Detective Chen was already pulling up Victoria Ashworth's file on her computer. According to her employment records, she was born Victoria Jameson, she read aloud. She changed her surname following her marriage in 2018. Tom felt his mouth drop open. Jameson? As in Marcus Jameson, the antique dealer? Very likely a relative, Morrison confirmed grimly. This suggests the conspiracy goes back much further than we initially thought. They may have been planning this operation for years, waiting for the right opportunity. The sophistication of the plot was becoming clear. Marcus Jameson sells Tom a desk with a hidden compartment already built in, or easily modified. His relative Victoria Ashworth gets insider access to royal security procedures through her consulting work. Dr. Hartwell uses his expertise and access to steal the actual necklace. They hide the evidence in Tom's flat, probably planning to retrieve it later once the initial investigation died down. But something went wrong with their plan, Tom realized. Otherwise, they would have recovered the gems before you found them. Exactly, Chen agreed. Dr. Hartwell's disappearance suggests they may have fallen out among themselves, or encountered some other complication that forced them to abandon the operation prematurely. Morrison was already coordinating with multiple agencies to track down the remaining conspirators. The investigation had transformed from a simple theft case into a complex conspiracy, involving multiple suspects and years of planning. Mr. Parker Bowles, Detective Chen said, closing her file. Based on the forensic evidence and the emerging picture of this conspiracy, I'm satisfied that you were an unwitting victim rather than a participant. You're free to go, though we may need to speak with you again as the investigation continues. Tom felt tears of relief threatening to spill down his cheeks. The nightmare was over, at least for him. His reputation would recover, his mother would be relieved, and his life could return to some semblance of normality. But I have to ask, he said as he prepared to leave, how did they know my routines well enough to access my flat repeatedly without being detected? Morrison and Chen exchanged a meaningful look. That's something we're still investigating, Morrison said carefully. It's possible they had inside information about royal family security arrangements. We're reviewing all personnel with access to such information. As Tom left Scotland Yard, he realized that while his personal ordeal was ending, the investigation into this elaborate conspiracy was just beginning. Somewhere out there, the real criminals were still free, and the missing Dr. Hartwell might hold the key to understanding the full scope of their ambitious and nearly successful plot. Tom's phone had been buzzing non-stop during his taxi ride home from Scotland Yard. News of the morning's raid had leaked to the press, and reporters were already gathering outside his Belgravia flat like vultures circling wounded prey. He instructed the driver to take him to his mother's private residence at Ray Mill House instead, knowing he needed to explain the situation to Queen Camilla before she heard a distorted version from the media. The drive to Wiltshire gave Tom time to process the extraordinary events of the day. Just 12 hours earlier, he had been a simple food critic enjoying his morning coffee. Now he was at the center of an international conspiracy involving stolen crown jewels and a sophisticated plot to embarrass the royal family. The whiplash of emotions, terror, confusion, relief, and now exhaustion, left him feeling drained and surreal. Ray Mill House sat peacefully in the Wiltshire countryside, its honey-colored stone walls and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the chaos Tom had left behind in London. As his taxi crunched up the gravel drive, he could see his mother's familiar silhouette in the drawing-room window. Queen Camilla had been pacing, he realized, probably worrying about her son since the first news reports broke. The housekeeper, Mrs. Williams, met Tom at the door with a mixture of relief and concern etched on her weathered face. "Mr. Tom, thank goodness you're here. Her Majesty has been beside herself with worry. The phones haven't stopped ringing all afternoon." Tom found his mother in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, still wearing the elegant blue suit she had worn to a charity luncheon earlier that day. Despite her royal composure, he could see the strain in her eyes, the tight lines around her mouth that betrayed her maternal anxiety. "Tom, darling," she said, rising immediately to embrace him. "I've been so frightened. The news reports were saying the most dreadful things. Are you all right? Have they hurt you?" Tom held his mother tightly, feeling the weight of the day's events finally beginning to lift from his shoulders. "I'm fine, Mum. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. I've been cleared of any wrongdoing." He spent the next hour carefully explaining everything that had happened, from the morning raid to the discovery of the conspiracy involving Dr. Hartwell and Victoria Ashworth. Queen Camilla listened intently, her expression shifting from relief to anger to amazement as the full scope of the plot became clear. "The audacity of it," she said when Tom finished his account. "To steal from the crown jewels is shocking enough, but to deliberately frame my son in order to create a scandal for the monarchy. It's almost treasonous," Tom nodded grimly. "Detective Chen thinks they may have been planning this for years, Mum. The antique dealer who sold me the desk was probably part of it from the beginning. They've been setting me up as their fall guy since I bought that furniture." Queen Camilla stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the peaceful countryside as she processed this information. "Tom, there's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. "Something that might explain why you were specifically targeted." Tom felt a chill of apprehension. "What do you mean?" His mother turned back to face him, her expression serious. 6 months ago, Charles and I made the decision to revise the succession planning documents. As part of that process, we've been quietly investigating ways to provide greater financial security for the extended family members who aren't in the direct line of succession. Tom waited for her to continue, not understanding the relevance. "One of the options we considered was creating a trust fund backed by some of the lesser royal artifacts and jewelry pieces," Queen Camilla explained. "Items that aren't part of the core crown jewels but still have significant historical and monetary value. Your name was mentioned in several of the planning documents as a potential beneficiary." The implications hit Tom like a physical blow. "You think someone with access to those planning documents might have learned about the discussions and decided to frame me?" "It would explain why you were chosen as the target," his mother said sadly. "If someone wanted to create maximum embarrassment for the monarchy, while also discrediting the entire idea of expanding financial support for family members, framing you for stealing crown jewels would accomplish both goals." Tom sank into a chair, overwhelmed by this new dimension to the conspiracy. Who would have had access to those planning documents? "A very small circle," Queen Camilla replied. "Senior members of the royal household staff, certain government officials, and a handful of legal and financial advisors. We'll need to share this information with the investigation team immediately." As if summoned by their conversation, Tom's phone rang with a call from Detective Chen. Tom answered on speaker so his mother could hear the latest developments. "Mr. Parker Bowles, we've made significant progress in the case," Chen announced. "We've located Victoria Ashworth. She was arrested 2 hours ago at Heathrow Airport attempting to board a flight to Dubai. She's agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Has she told you anything about Dr. Hartwell?" Tom asked. "That's the most interesting part," Chen continued. "According to Ashworth, Dr. Hartwell isn't missing by choice. She claims he was kidnapped by a third party who wanted to take control of the stolen necklace. She says the original plan was much smaller in scope. They were only going to steal and fence a few minor pieces from the royal collection." Queen Camilla leaned closer to the phone. "Detective, this is Queen Camilla. What does Ms. Ashworth say about how my son was chosen as their target?" "Your Majesty," Chen replied, clearly surprised to be speaking directly with the Queen consort. "Ashworth claims the decision to frame your son came from this mysterious third party. She says someone approached her and Hartwell about 6 weeks ago with inside information about royal family financial planning and detailed intelligence about Mr. Parker Bowles' daily routines." Tom and his mother exchanged alarmed glances. The conspiracy was even more complex than they had imagined, involving someone with access to the most sensitive royal household information. "Detective Chen," Queen Camilla said firmly, "I believe my son and I have information that may be relevant to your investigation. Someone within the royal household or government may have been involved in this plot. We'd like to meet with you and Colonel Morrison as soon as possible." "Of course, Your Majesty. We can be at Ray Mill House within 2 hours if that's convenient." As Tom ended the call, he realized that while his personal nightmare was over, the investigation was entering an even more dangerous phase. Someone with intimate access to royal family secrets had orchestrated this elaborate scheme, and they were still out there, possibly planning their next move. Detective Chen and Colonel Morrison arrived at Ray Mill House just as the autumn sun was setting, behind the Wiltshire Hills. They were accompanied by a third person Tom didn't recognize, a tall, sharp-eyed woman in an expensive charcoal suit who introduced herself as Director Sarah Pemberton from MI5's Domestic Security Division. "Your Majesty, Mr. Parker Bowles," Director Pemberton began as they settled in Queen Camilla's private study. "What began as a theft investigation has now become a matter of national security. The level of inside information required to orchestrate this conspiracy suggests we may be dealing with a serious breach within the royal household or government." Queen Camilla had prepared a detailed list of everyone who had access to the succession planning documents that mentioned Tom. As she read through the names, Tom was struck by how small and exclusive the circle was. fewer than 15 people in total, all of them trusted advisors who had served the monarchy for years. There's something else we need to discuss, Director Pemberton continued, pulling out a secure tablet device. During our interrogation of Victoria Ashworth, she revealed details about this mysterious third party that are deeply concerning. She turned the tablet screen toward Tom and his mother, displaying a photograph of a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with silver hair and intelligent eyes. Tom studied the image carefully but didn't recognize the face. "This is Sir Richard Blackwood," Pemberton explained. "Until 6 months ago, he was Deputy Private Secretary to His Majesty the King. He resigned his position citing personal reasons, but we now believe he may have been planning this operation while still employed in the royal household." Queen Camilla gasped audibly. "Richard? But that's impossible. He served the royal family faithfully for 23 years. Charles trusted him implicitly." According to Ashworth, Detective Chen added, "Sir Richard approached her and Dr. Hartwell with detailed information about royal security procedures and inside knowledge of your family's private routines. He provided them with architectural plans of the Tower of London storage facilities and a complete schedule of when different areas would be lightly guarded." Tom felt sick to his stomach. The betrayal was personal and professional, striking at the very heart of the monarchy's security systems. But why would he do this? What did he hope to gain? Director Pemberton consulted her notes. Financial records show that Sir Richard was facing severe personal debt problems. His wife's cancer treatments, which weren't covered by the NHS, had cost the family over $400,000. His son's gambling debts added another $150,000 to their financial burden. He was desperate. But framing Tom specifically, Queen Camilla said, her voice tight with controlled anger, that suggests this wasn't just about money. That was deliberate malice. Ashworth claims Sir Richard was particularly bitter about the succession planning discussions, Chen explained. He felt that extending financial support to extended family members was fiscally irresponsible during times of economic hardship. Apparently, he saw framing Mr. Parker Bowles as a way to discredit the entire concept, while also solving his own financial problems. Colonel Morrison had been quietly making phone calls throughout the conversation. He rejoined the group with grim news. "Sir Richard's flat in Kensington has been under surveillance since this afternoon. He returned home 2 hours ago, but our officers report that he appears to be preparing to leave the country. He's been seen loading suitcases into his car." Director Pemberton stood immediately. "We need to move now. If he escapes the country, we may never be able to extradite him. Some of the artifacts from this theft could be sold to private collectors and disappear forever." Tom felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. The man responsible for nearly destroying his life was about to be caught, but the betrayal of trust involved was devastating for the entire royal institution. "There's one more thing," Detective Chen said hesitantly. "During our search of Victoria Ashworth's belongings, we found evidence that this conspiracy may have been even larger than we initially thought." She had detailed files on several other royal family members, including information about their security arrangements and financial circumstances. Queen Camilla paled. "You think they were planning additional operations?" "It's possible," Pemberton confirmed. "Sir Richard may have been selling royal household intelligence to criminal organizations for months. We're conducting a complete security review of all royal residences and personnel." Tom's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it absently, then felt his blood run cold as he read the contents. The message was from an unknown number. "The game isn't over yet. Some secrets are worth more than jewels." He showed the message to Director Pemberton, who immediately called for additional security teams to be dispatched to Ray Mill House. Within minutes, the peaceful country estate was swarming with armed protection officers and MI5 agents. "Sir Richard must have contacts we haven't identified yet," Pemberton said grimly. "Someone is still out there, and they know we're closing in on the conspiracy." Colonel Morrison coordinated with the teams moving to arrest Sir Richard in London. As they waited for news, Tom found himself reflecting on how quickly his quiet life had been turned upside down by forces he never could have imagined. "Mum," he said quietly, "what happens to the monarchy's reputation after something like this? How do you recover from having someone so close to the crown betray everything they swore to protect?" Queen Camilla took her son's hand. "The same way we always have, darling. By being honest about what happened, holding the guilty parties accountable, and proving that the institution is stronger than any individual's weakness or greed. A call came through on Pemberton's secure line. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing second. "Sir Richard's flat is empty," she announced after hanging up. "Neighbors report seeing him leave 3 hours ago. We've issued alerts at all airports and border crossings, but he has a significant head start." Tom realized with growing dread that while his personal ordeal might be over, the broader conspiracy was still very much active. Sir Richard Blackwood was still free, possibly with access to state secrets that could compromise royal security for years to come. The anonymous text message on his phone served as a chilling reminder that some of the conspirators were still operating in the shadows, and their plans for the royal family might be far from finished. 3 weeks later, Tom stood in the state dining room at Buckingham Palace, watching as King Charles III held an emergency press conference to address the conspiracy that had nearly brought down one of the monarchy's most trusted advisors. The revelation that Sir Richard Blackwood had orchestrated an elaborate plot involving stolen crown, jewels, and the attempted framing of a royal family member had sent shockwaves through the British establishment. The investigation had moved swiftly after Sir Richard's disappearance. International cooperation had led to his arrest at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, where he was attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country with false documents and nearly 2 million in untraceable cryptocurrency accounts. Dr. Edmund Hartwell had been found alive but traumatized in a warehouse in East London, confirming Victoria Ashworth's story that he had been kidnapped when the conspiracy began to unravel. Director Pemberton had briefed the royal family on the full scope of the investigation just that morning. The conspiracy had indeed been larger than initially suspected, with Sir Richard having sold sensitive intelligence about royal family movements and security arrangements to criminal organizations across Europe. The recovery of his encrypted communications revealed plans for additional thefts and potentially more serious crimes that would have compromised national security. The betrayal of trust, represented by Sir Richard Blackwood's action, strikes at the very heart of our constitutional monarchy, King Charles said to the assembled reporters, his voice carrying the weight of personal disappointment. "However, I want to emphasize that our institutions proved strong enough to uncover this conspiracy and bring the perpetrators to justice." Tom watched his stepfather's performance with admiration. Charles had insisted on taking personal responsibility for the security failures that had allowed such a conspiracy to develop, while also praising the investigative work that had ultimately exposed the truth. The king's candor about the monarchy's vulnerabilities had actually increased public support, rather than diminishing it. The media coverage had been intense but largely sympathetic to Tom's situation. His complete vindication, combined with the revelation that he had been specifically targeted as part of a broader attack on the monarchy, had transformed him from a suspect into a victim in the public eye. Several prominent journalists had written thoughtful pieces about the pressure faced by royal family members and the sophisticated nature of modern threats against public institutions. Queen Camilla joined Tom by the window as the press conference concluded. The past 3 weeks had aged her visibly, the stress of managing both a family crisis and a constitutional emergency taking its toll despite her years of experience with public scrutiny. "How are you holding up, darling?" she asked, studying her son's face with maternal concern. Tom considered the question carefully. The immediate trauma of being suspected of treason had faded, but the deeper implications of what had happened continued to resonate through his daily life. His flat had been thoroughly searched and renovated. His routines had been completely reorganized for security purposes, and he now lived with the constant awareness that his connection to the royal family made him a permanent target for those who wished to harm the monarchy. "I keep thinking about the planning that went into it all," Tom replied. "Sir Richard spent years building trust, gaining access, learning our vulnerabilities. The desk purchase, Victoria's employment with the royal collection, Dr. Hartwell's expertise, it was all coordinated years in advance. The security review has identified several other potential vulnerabilities," Queen Camilla admitted. "We're implementing new protocols for background checks and limiting access to sensitive information. But Charles is concerned about becoming so security conscious that it interferes with our ability to serve the public effectively. Detective Chen had visited Tom the previous week to provide a final briefing on the case. All three primary conspirators were now in custody, facing serious charges including theft, conspiracy, and violations of the Official Secrets Act. The recovered crown jewels had been returned to the Tower of London with enhanced security measures, and the investigation into potential additional criminal activities was ongoing. "There's something I need to tell you," Queen Camilla said quietly. "Charles and I have made a decision about the succession planning discussions that started all of this." Tom turned to face his mother fully, concerned about what new development might be coming. "We're moving forward with the financial security provisions for extended family members," she continued, "not in exactly the same form as originally planned, but we refuse to allow Sir Richard's betrayal to dictate royal policy. The monarchy has survived much worse than one man's greed and resentment." Tom felt a complex mixture of gratitude and apprehension. The additional financial support would certainly be helpful, but he also understood that it would make him a more visible target for future schemes against the royal family. "However," Queen Camilla added, "we're also implementing much stricter security protocols for all family members who will benefit from these arrangements. Your personal protection will be significantly enhanced, though we'll try to do it in ways that don't interfere too much with your normal life." As they talked, Tom's phone buzzed with a message from his literary agent. 3 different publishers were bidding for the rights to his account of the conspiracy, and a prominent production company had inquired about film rights. The idea of profiting from such a traumatic experience felt uncomfortable, but Tom also recognized that telling his story might help. Other people understand the sophisticated nature of modern threats against public institutions, Director. Pemberton had made one final visit to Ray Mill House the previous week to brief the family on the broader implications of the investigation. The conspiracy had exposed systemic vulnerabilities in royal household security that extended far beyond one corrupt official. Reforms would take years to implement fully, and the monarchy would need to balance transparency with legitimate security concerns. "The most disturbing aspect," Pemberton had explained, "is how much damage Sir Richard could have caused if his greed hadn't made him sloppy. Someone with his access and patience could have compromised royal security for decades if they had been more focused on ideology than money." As Tom prepared to leave Buckingham Palace and return to his normal life, he reflected on how fundamentally the experience had changed his understanding of his place within the royal family. He had always seen his connection to the monarchy as largely ceremonial, providing certain privileges balanced by minor inconveniences and occasional media attention. Now he understood that his family connection made him a permanent potential target for those who wanted to harm the institution of monarchy itself. The conspiracy hadn't been about him personally. He had simply been a convenient tool for people who wanted to embarrass and weaken the crown. Walking through the palace corridors toward the exit, Tom passed portraits of previous generations of royals who had faced their own crises and scandals. The monarchy had survived world wars, abdication crises, and numerous personal scandals over the centuries. This conspiracy, sophisticated though it was, represented just another challenge that the institution would absorb and overcome. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. "Saw the news conference. Glad this nightmare is finally over for you. The children send their love." Tom smiled as he stepped out into the London afternoon. The nightmare was indeed over, but the experience had taught him valuable lessons about resilience, family loyalty, and the price of living in the public eye. The conspiracy had failed in its ultimate goal of damaging the monarchy, and Tom had emerged stronger and more appreciative of the complex institution he had been born into. The stolen crown jewels were safely back where they belonged. The conspirators were facing justice, and the royal family had proven once again that it could weather even the most sophisticated attacks on its integrity and security.